There lies a door in every man's soul, marked not with gold, but with shadow. Few dare open it. Fewer still return unchanged. The priests of old built temples to the sun, yet they feared the moonless night. But Carl Jung did not fear the dark. He walked willingly into the abyss of the human soul, armed with no sword, only a mirror. The modern man exalts reason, praises clarity, and lights up every corner of his world. But inside him is a cavern, ancient and silent, filled with the echoes of forgotten selves. These echoes are the shadow, and here lies the paradox: what you reject in yourself, what you shame, suppress, deny, does not die. It retreats, it watches, it waits. Beneath the surface of every virtue, a vice. Behind every smile, a hidden snarl. The man who believes he is only good is often the most dangerous, for he sees no enemy within. But the man who sees his shadow, who dares to greet it, to know it, that man walks the razor's edge between madness and mastery. This is the path Jung dared to map, not with compass, but with courage. This is the dark side of your mind. In every man, there is a room that no lantern may illuminate, a chamber sealed not by lock and key, but by centuries of silence. It is a place older than memory, deeper than thought, where the forgotten parts of the self reside, unseen, unheard, and untouched. This is the chamber of the shadow. The shadow, as Carl Jung conceived it, is not a monster in the traditional sense. It is not a force of pure malice, nor is it merely the dark foil to the light of the conscious mind. Rather, it is the totality of that which one has cast out of oneself. Fears unspoken, instincts denied, desires shamed, and truths too heavy to carry in daylight. It is the twin born in secret, growing with each act of rejection, becoming not weaker, but stronger with every denial. Like the roots of a tree twisting deep into the soil, the shadow grows not upwards into the sky, but downward into the unseen. And while we decorate the branches of our character with the ornaments of civility, morality, and public virtue, we forget that these same branches are fed by something far more primal. The Greeks saw in the myth of Narcissus a man enthralled by his own reflection, but blind to what lurked beneath the surface of the pool. That darkness, the part of us that hungers when we preach restraint, that envies while we praise kindness, that rages while we pretend to smile, is no less us than the persona we wear each day. In fact, the shadow is often more sincere, for it is not constrained by the tyranny of social approval. It lives in impulse, in dream, in metaphor. It thrives where light dares not shine. Society teaches a man to speak in measured tones, to clothe himself in self-control, to declare with pride what he stands for. But seldom is he taught to ask, what do I secretly despise? What do I envy in others? What part of myself do I pray no one ever sees? These questions open the door to the chamber, not with violence, but with the gentle persistence of truth. And once opened, the room reveals not demons, but the discarded fragments of one's own soul, fragmented yet familiar, weeping for recognition rather than retribution. No one escapes the formation of a shadow. Even the most virtuous saints cast one. Even the most enlightened minds are haunted by what they have forgotten to love within themselves. The shadow is not born in wickedness, but in separation. From emotion, from memory, from the forbidden and the feared. It is the orphaned aspect of the psyche, longing not for dominance but for reintegration. The journey into the self does not begin with glory. It begins with a fall. It begins when the structure of the known collapses. Not with a crash, but with a whisper. A crack appears in the facade of the ego, and through that fracture pours the unsettling awareness that there is more within than we have dared to admit. It is not enlightenment that calls us first, but a discomfort, subtle, creeping, sometimes disguised as restlessness, other times as grief, or rage without origin. Something stirs beneath the surface of the psyche not to destroy, but to beckon, and in this moment, the descent begins. In Jung's vision, this descent was not an act of escape but of confrontation. Not a retreat from the world, but a deliberate stepping away from its illusions, its masks, its distractions. It is the archetypal journey, one echoed across myth and philosophy, the path of the hero not toward conquest, but toward encounter. Yet the foe is not a dragon or a tyrant. It is the self. The ancients told of Orpheus, whose love drew him into the underworld, of Psyche, who lit her lamp in the darkness to behold the face of love and found terror, of Odysseus, who traveled to Hades not for escape, but for knowledge. Each tale whispers the same truth: to ascend in spirit, one must first descend into shadow. To know what we are, we must know what we are not. And that knowing lies hidden not in the light of day, but in the hidden chambers of the night. The ego resists this descent. It has built its home in the realm of clarity, of control, of surface identities. It fears the depths, for in them it cannot govern. There are no mirrors in the abyss, only truths too primal for language. In these regions, the boundary between self and other dissolves. Time fractures. The child you once were weeps beside the adult you pretend to be. The memories you buried become living figures. The monsters you feared now wear your face. This is not metaphor. It is experience, a confrontation so intimate that even dreams feel exposed. Jung named this the confrontation with the unconscious and likened it to descending into a cave filled with symbols older than civilization. Here, the shadow stands not as an enemy, but as a mirror held by the depths themselves. A voice may whisper, not in words, but in symbols, images, synchronicities that defy logic yet feel piercingly precise. You are not what you thought. You are not only what you show. Something vast, ancient, and buried has stirred. Within the shadow lies a paradox, one that has haunted sages, poets, and philosophers for centuries. The idea that what is most dangerous in man may also be what is most divine. The shadow does not merely contain the dark. It contains intensity, potency, and rawness that the conscious self cannot often wield without trembling. It is the storehouse of what civilization could not digest, the energies too wild for the polished stage of polite society. And yet, it is from this very place that the greatest fire can be drawn. For beneath the shame, the fear, and the rage, there exists a creative force that longs not to destroy, but to emerge. Jung understood that to repress the shadow was not to eliminate it, but to exile it to the unconscious, where it gains strength in silence. Like a beast starved and chained in the dark, it grows not weaker, but more cunning, more primal. It emerges in projection, when we condemn in others what we cannot face in ourselves. It emerges in compulsions, when we act out the very thing we swore to avoid. It emerges in emotional possession, when we are overtaken by irrational fury or lust or terror that seems to have no source. But the source is always us. It is the part of us that was never allowed to speak, and yet, this perilous force is also a source of immense power. From the shadow springs vitality, the primal strength of instincts, the clarity of raw emotion, the intensity that inspires art, innovation, and transformation. It is no accident that the artist is so often tormented, the mystic so often mad. For to peer too closely into the depths is to risk being consumed by them, but to avoid them entirely is to live only half a life, pale and polite, untouched by danger, and therefore untouched by depth. History offers countless examples of both extremes. When the shadow is denied, it lashes out in the collective, forming movements of scapegoating, authoritarianism, and moral hysteria. The tyrant is not born solely of ideology, but of internal fracture, the man at war with himself, projecting his shadow onto the world. Yet in those who have learned to integrate their darkness, we see another story: the healer who once was wounded, the leader who has known failure, the writer whose words bleed with pain, but uplift with truth. These are not people who conquered their darkness. They are people who bowed to it, studied it, made peace with it, and in doing so, found a way to use it as fuel rather than fire. The shadow is the crucible where the false self burns away, and what remains is not always gentle, but it is undeniably real. The process of becoming whole is not a matter of eradicating darkness, but of transforming one's relationship to it. Jung called this the work of individuation, but at its core, it is alchemy. Not the turning of lead into gold, but the transmutation of unconscious matter into conscious essence. The alchemist's furnace is the self, and the flame is awareness. The raw material, prima materia, is the shadow itself, chaotic, formless, often painful, but essential. Without it, there can be no transformation, no true authenticity, no real inner freedom. Integration does not mean surrendering to the shadow's urges, nor does it imply justifying harmful impulses. It means acknowledging them, exploring their roots, and learning to understand their language. The emotion repressed is not extinguished, it is encrypted. Anger, when exiled, becomes bitterness or self-sabotage. Desire, when shamed, twists into obsession. Fear, when buried, grows into paralysis. But when brought into consciousness, these same energies become tools. Anger can become righteous action. Desire can become intimacy. Fear can become clarity. It is not the content of the shadow that destroys. It is its denial. The work of integration is painstaking. It is the opposite of denial, the refusal to turn away. It asks a man to sit with his shame, not to dissolve it immediately, but to examine it, where it came from, whose voice first called him unworthy, what hidden standard he silently tried and failed to meet. It asks a woman to feel her rage, not to act it out blindly, but to listen to what it demands. Beneath every fury is a wound, beneath every wound, a story. And to integrate is to allow that story to surface, to be held in awareness without the need for vengeance or suppression. Jung's tool for this process was not merely analysis, but imagination, a conscious dialogue with the unconscious through image, symbol, and vision. Active imagination becomes the bridge between ego and shadow, a space where figures from within can speak their truths. In this space, the rejected self is given voice, not to dominate the psyche, but to join it. Integration is not conquest, it is unification. It is the moment when the internal war gives way to dialogue. When a man can say, "I am both," and find within that contradiction not weakness, but completeness, the result is a quiet power. The man who has befriended his own darkness does not seek to dominate others. He no longer fears their darkness. He becomes spacious, unthreatened, capable of holding complexity without fleeing into simplicity. He becomes not perfect, but sovereign, not pure, but present. There is no virtue more powerful than one forged in the fire of one's own truth, and no wisdom deeper than that born from having walked through the underworld of the psyche with eyes open. In the deepest moments of introspection, when all the layers of identity have been peeled away, name, profession, beliefs, loyalties, what remains is not a pure being of light, but a composite of contradictions. And in that sacred confrontation lies the final revelation: the shadow is not an intruder in the soul, it is a native. It has always lived there, watching from behind the veil of consciousness, shaping choices, coloring emotions, and emerging in dreams as symbols too strange to be explained by reason. The shadow is not an enemy to be conquered, but a brother long silenced, a twin denied legitimacy. What Jung knew, and what the ancient philosophers intuitively sensed, is that what we exile within ourselves does not vanish, it waits. This revelation does not come in a flash of triumph, but in a quiet undoing. The man who once fought against his fear realizes that it is not the fear that paralyzed him, but the refusal to feel it. The woman who tried to suppress her ambition sees that her bitterness was not born of ego, but of her own forgotten flame. The seeker who spent a lifetime reaching toward the light suddenly understands that the light itself was born in contrast to the dark, and so he returns from his search not with more purity, but with more wholeness. The final revelation is not that the shadow disappears once it is known. It does not retreat simply because it has been acknowledged. Rather, it becomes a companion, a subtle presence that reminds us of the terrain we have crossed. Its voice becomes less threatening, more instructive. The unconscious contents that once erupted in chaos are now integrated into the rhythm of life. Like dissonant chords resolved into harmony, the energy once trapped in repression becomes vitality, grounded in awareness. This revelation also brings humility. It dismantles the illusion of moral superiority, of a life lived above contradiction. One sees in others not just their virtues or their faults, but the complex web of internal conflict that all humans carry. The need to judge softens. The capacity for empathy expands. Because one has seen the darkness and survived, one no longer needs to project it outward or dress it in disguise. It simply is. And it is part of what makes the human soul so immense, so layered, and so utterly mysterious. Jung once said that a tree's branches cannot reach to heaven unless its roots go down to hell. The final revelation is this paradox, not a resolution of light over dark, but the realization that light and dark are inseparable, reflections of one another, dancing in eternal dialogue. Wholeness is not found by ascending above suffering, nor by sinking into it, but by walking the line where both meet and allowing that tension to be lived fully. Begin tonight, not tomorrow, not after enlightenment, tonight. Before sleep, write what you are most afraid to admit. Speak to your shadow in the mirror, not to tame it, but to know it. Keep a dream journal. Ask your nightmares what they want to teach. Listen. Because every time you turn toward the dark instead of fleeing, you reclaim a piece of your soul. Subscribe for more journeys inward. Share this with someone who fears their own power. And remember, the light you seek is hidden in the dark you fear.